LSU football needs more running back depth. We buying that?
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Plus, remember, you can always find us on YouTube every single day and, of course, for free. My name is Caroline Fenton. I'm your host, as I am every single day. You can follow me on Twitter at CarolineFenton1. You can follow along with the podcast at Locked On LSU. Like, comment, rate, subscribe, all that great stuff. Just appreciate you for being here and appreciate you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. Let's get into it because we've got some time ahead of us before LSU gets after it into fall camp, when practice starts to ramp up a little bit, when some of our questions about personnel is answered, because that'll be answered as, the transfer portal starts to just kind of start to figure itself out whenever some of LSU's targets decide where they ultimately went to end up, whether that's LSU or not. Some of those questions will be answered in terms of injuries that may or may not be healed in time for fall camp. Some of those positional battles will start to fall into place. You'll know what I mean. We've been here before. There are a lot of questions that come out of spring. Injuries, position battles, transfer portal being a new one over the last couple of years. And then those things start to figure themselves out. We may learn the answer sooner rather than later, and it may be later rather than sooner. Let's go back to last year. And it's really weird to kind of put myself back into that mental space that we were in this time last year, because it feels so astronomically different than the situation that LSU is in right now. But remember, this time last year, we were talking about a legitimate quarterback battle between Jaden Daniels, Garrett Nussmeier, and I believe at this point, Miles Brennan was still playing football. So just think about how different of a world we're living in now than we were last year. But remember that some of these position battles don't figure themselves out, in Jaden Daniels' case, until right before the Florida State game. Now, of course, the quarterback position is different than any other position on the field, but you know what I mean. There are a lot of questions that are going to be unanswered and likely will be unanswered for quite some time. But it's fair to talk about some of the questions that have come up, some of the storylines that have come up throughout spring practice. Are we buying it or are we not? And one of those questions that I have, that you probably have, that have been talked about in LSU circles is the depth and the health of the running back room. And I think that when it comes to LSU's running back room, there are really two schools of thought. One of those schools of thought is, look, you need depth. You got Trey Holly and Noah Cain really as your only running backs right now. So you need to add some depth there. I mean, it's true. You cannot go into this season simply with just Noah Cain being your only running back with legitimate college experience. No disrespect to Trey Holly whatsoever, because I've heard nothing but great things about him, both from Mike Denbrock, from Brian Kelly. He's a true freshman. You can't go into the season with two running backs, only one of which actually has legitimate experience. So I get that. I understand that school of thought. And then there's the other school of thought that says, okay, yeah, but you also have three running backs that are potentially coming back. Let's just assume that those three running backs in John Emery, in Armoni Goodwin, and Josh Williams, let's say they all come back. And then you bring in another running back. Well, you're potentially looking at 6 running backs in that running back room, which is also making a really massive assumption that all 3 of those running backs would be coming back. But then you'd be looking at Armoni Goodwin, Josh Williams, John Emery, Noah Cain, and Trey Holly in that running back room. Awfully crowded in that running back room. And also, okay, let's be real, take out Trey Holly. Just to be fair, as a true freshman, not going to be seeing as much work, not as reliable of a guy as those other 5 would be. So that 5th is that imaginary transfer portal player that I'm throwing in there. So I get that train of thought is, okay, yeah, no, you can't go into the season with just Trey Holly and Noah Cain, but also You have 3 running backs that could potentially come back. So what's the need for it? And then I also could, counter that and say, but it never hurts to continue to build talent. It never hurts to have as many good players at a certain position as possible. It never hurts to continue to build for the future. Because, like we always say, you're always recruiting. Coaches in college are always going to be recruiting. And that's correct. It's true. It's because they're always looking for the future. It's because it's not just about 2023. It's about 2024 and 2025 and 2026. And what does your team look like, not just this September, but next September and 2 and 4 and 5 and 10 Septembers after that? That's these coaches' jobs. That's the recruiters' jobs. Because we're not even talking about the 2023 recruiting class anymore. No. We're on a 2024 and 2025 because that's just the nature of college football. If you're not recruiting constantly and you're not recruiting these kids from the time they're 13 years old, you're already behind. And that's just an example of the argument that I'm making, that these coaches constantly have to build for the future. So yeah, let's say all 3 of those running backs that are out. Of course, we know that Josh Williams and Armoni Goodwin are each out with injuries. John Emery out with academic issues. However, Brian Kelly's not counting out that John Emery could come back if he gets his academics figured out, if he gets what he needs to do in the classroom figured out. Brian Kelly has not counted out the fact that John Emery could come back at some point in the season. Let's say those 3 come back. They join Noah Cain. They join Trey Holly, and you have that 6th running back there. I think that's more so building for the future and giving yourself some security, giving yourself some insurance, building a team while simultaneously collecting talent. Because look at the running back room as is currently constructed. The 4 potential starters, the 4 starting caliber players that you have in that running back room. Well, Noah Cain is in his final year of eligibility. Armoni Goodwin, he does have 2 years of eligibility remaining if he does decide to exercise those 2 years of eligibility. Josh Williams, okay, side note, I don't know why it is so difficult for me to calculate how many years of eligibility individual players have if it's not just given to me on a silver platter. I don't know why. I have such a brain fart with it. Like, it should just be basic math. But with red shirts and injuries and COVID, I'm never quite sure. Don't make fun of me for that. That's, really my Achilles heel is really what should be simple math. For some reason, it's so difficult. So Josh Williams either has 1 or 2 years of eligibility remaining. That meme of like Zach Galifianakis in The Hangover when he has all of these, math figures and numbers going through his head. That was me trying to figure out how many years of eligibility Josh Williams has remaining, because he either has 1 or 2 years depending on COVID. Let's just, for sake of an argument, say 2 years, maybe 1. I don't know. And then John Emery is going into his final year of eligibility. So when you're looking at it, at the end of this year, you would only have 3, maybe 2, depending on my botched math with Josh Williams, running backs in that room. And it never, ever hurts to give yourself some insurance. It never, ever hurts to give yourself a little bit of depth. Because at this point, if you add a running back, there are no transfer portal implications. Because in the past, you could say, okay, well, if you continue to just pack a bunch of talented players at one position group, some of them are going to leave. Well, at this point, the transfer portal is closed. So what you would have is just options at running back. And what you would have is the ability to let Trey Holly develop and to let Trey Holly learn. Maybe he's ready to start this season. Maybe he's ready to play this season. But at this point, I'm not going into the year hoping and praying and keeping my fingers crossed that if a couple of these players go down with injury, knock on wood, that Trey Holly would be ready to step in and contribute immediately and be kind of a seamless transition. Adding another running back into this room would not hurt this team. It also wouldn't be the end of the world if you didn't add another running back into this room. It really, really wouldn't. I mean, it's just adding some extra talent. So what running back would make sense to add into this room? A name that has been floated around LSU spaces ever since he entered the transfer portal. We will get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about FanDuel. Y'all know how much I love FanDuel because it is the perfect place to bet on the NBA playoffs. Because right now, new customers can get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. The best thing that I think is the best thing about FanDuel, what I love about betting on FanDuel is it's safe and you know that it's secure. I can put my bank information into FanDuel and know that it is protected. I know that when I place a bet with FanDuel and I win, that I'm going to get paid instantly. It's safe, it's secure. If you want to add two-factor authentication, you can do that. If that makes you feel a little bit more safe and secure about using the FanDuel app, they have got you covered. And there is no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and every day is coming up tomorrow on the podcast. We've got over-under win totals on FanDuel, baby. Where does LSU stand? What does Vegas think about LSU football going into this season? And what does Vegas think about the rest of the SEC? We'll get into that on tomorrow's podcast. But breaking down one of the storylines surrounding spring football for LSU, the depth in the running back room. Do they need to add a little bit more depth? Do you need to add a little bit more security? And honestly, as ridiculous as it might seem, I'm buying it because I'm not putting all of my eggs into the basket of two players that are hurt. And it happens. You get injured. But I don't know if those two players are going to make 100% recoveries. I don't know if Armoni Goodwin and Josh Williams are going to be at the level that they were last year. I have no reason to believe that they won't. But I also have reserved the right to have skepticism. And I also reserve the right to want LSU to add a little bit more insurance at a position that's incredibly important. So who could they add? Well, there's one player that honestly just makes way too much sense. There is one player that just really, when he entered the transfer portal, the more and more I learned about him, the more and more I'm thinking like, okay, yeah, he's coming to LSU. It's just not official yet. And that is Logan Diggs, the running back from Notre Dame. So what is the latest on Logan Diggs? Who is Logan Diggs? Logan Diggs, just a little bit of a refresher. Did break him down on an earlier podcast. You can find that on your preferred podcast platform. You can also find that on YouTube as well. But just a little bit of a refresher. Just wrapped up his sophomore year at Notre Dame. Was a running back who just entered the transfer portal. So yes, he's coming from Notre Dame. So whenever a player enters the transfer portal from Notre Dame, that obviously makes sense. There's an obvious connection to LSU for obvious reasons. But this adds another layer to it because Logan Diggs is from Louisiana. He's from the New Orleans area. So it's Notre Dame kid. He's from Louisiana. Sounds like a match made in heaven, right? Like it sounds just like a little bit too perfect. 2022, Logan Diggs had 165 rushes for 820 yards, had 4 touchdowns on the ground, and added some stats in the air as well. Had 10 receptions for 211 yards and 2 touchdowns. That is a pretty wild statistic for a running back. 10 receptions, 211 yards. You're averaging over 20 yards per catch. Pretty impressive from a running back. So that's what I take away just from that stat line. And I will never act like I am a Notre Dame football expert. I'm not going to act like I watched every single Notre Dame game because I didn't. I watched some. Go Irish. But what that tells me is he's an incredibly versatile running back. That he's a running back that you can use on first and second down. That you can take it up the middle. That's a running back that you can use more as a third down back. It's a running back that you can use catching balls out of the backfield. He's a versatile guy. And I think that having that versatility in that position is incredibly important and could be valuable to this running back room, looking at some of these running backs that do have question marks, not just with the academics with John Emery and not just with the injuries with Armoni Goodwin and Josh Williams, but Armoni Goodwin had a fumble problem this past season. Does he need a little bit more competition in that room to really force that ball security? But the latest with Logan Diggs, he's looking around. He's doing his due diligence as he should. He's shopping around, looking at different programs. He visited South Carolina this past weekend, visited Ole Miss last week. He visited South Carolina. I know that because his mom posted on it on Instagram. So little tidbit there. If you're looking for some information, Check the mom's Instagrams, check the girlfriend's Instagrams. That's where you always find the gold. That's where you find the tea. But he visited South Carolina and Ole Miss last weekend. From what I've heard around the grumblings of the recruiting extraordinaires, supposedly South Carolina went well. Supposedly Ole Miss did not go very well. Ole Miss doesn't need a running back. They got Quinshad Judkins, the reigning SEC Freshman of the Year, who won it over Harold Perkins, and we know how good Harold Perkins was, so that's saying something. But when that looks to me, he's doing his due diligence. Off the top of my head, to my knowledge, Logan Diggs does not have a visit to LSU scheduled. I anticipate that to change very quickly. Every crystal ball out there that I have seen, whether it's On3 or 24/7 Sports or Rivals or, whatever recruiting website you prefer to use, I try and look at all of them, like to see, I get a good grasp on what several different recruiting insiders and transfer portal insiders have been saying. Every single one says Logan Diggs is headed to LSU. Every single crystal ball says Logan Diggs, LSU. And it's because it just makes that much sense. Now, like I said, if LSU doesn't land Logan Diggs, if Logan Diggs decides to go to South Carolina, wants to go away from home, likes what Shane Beamer is building at South Carolina, this running back room is going to be okay. You've got enough talent in there. You've got enough depth in there. There's enough depth in there that I would feel okay going into this season with this running back room. My point being, it never hurts. It never hurts to add more depth. And with Logan Diggs playing a position that's a little bit of a question mark for you right now, and of course, on the inside, they know more about it than we do. They know more about how Armoni Goodwin is recovering from his surgery. They know how Josh Williams is recovering from injury. They know what John Emery's grades look like. They know their need for running back, and whether it's pressing or not, they know that on the inside. I just think it makes way too much sense to miss out on a player that looks versatile, that looks talented, that has experience, that has 2 years of playing experience, and has 2 years of eligibility remaining. Man, that checks every single box of Brian Kelly's transfer portal and recruiting priorities. He's from Louisiana. He's got eligibility. He's got experience. What more could you ask for especially a guy that could contribute to a questionable running back room going into the season? Coming up next, Brian Kelly and company, they are not the only ones that are putting in that work in the transfer portal. I'll explain coming up next. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Brian Kelly and company, they've been putting in that work in the transfer portal. I'll do a full breakdown on some of the offers that they have already given to some players in the transfer portal. We'll get into that later on this week, so stay tuned for that. That'll be available on your preferred podcast platform and, of course, on the Locked On LSU YouTube page as well. But Brian Kelly is not alone. Kim Mulkey is at it again. Because if you thought that Kim Mulkey was building something special before the national championship, you'd be right. If you thought that Kim Mulkey has built something special after they won the national championship in just her second year, turning that program around from really nothing special to being the most special, you were right. If you thought that Kim Mulkey was building something special when LSU women's basketball landed the number one player in the transfer portal in Haley Van Lith from Louisville, you would be right. And you would be right to say that, man, every single thing that I have heard and that I've seen coming out of this women's basketball program, this is looking like a dynasty is being built. And I don't like to throw the D word around very often. But Kim Mulkey has done it again. Not only did Kim Mulkey land the number one ranked player in the transfer portal, Haley Van Lith out of Louisville, averaging almost 20 points a game, two-time all ACC first team. Yes, you done that. Check that box. That sent shockwaves throughout the women's college basketball space. But now, Kim Mulkey landed the number 2 transfer portal player in the country because Anissa Morrow is now an LSU Tiger. Now, you probably heard Haley Van Lith's name before. And if you haven't, that's fine. It's not, I understand that women's college basketball is not everybody's forte. But Haley Van Lith, she got our team to the Elite Eight. She has a very big personality. Anissa Morrow is a name that you may not have heard before. She played at a smaller school out of DePaul, a junior forward out of DePaul. But this girl is freaking unreal. And this girl adds just even more to this team that Kim Mulkey has already built. She's a 6'1" junior forward out of DePaul, like I mentioned. She's in her career at DePaul, in her 66 career games, she had a double-double in 53 of them. Let that sink in. 53 of her 66 career games in college basketball, she had a double-double. I mean, that's unheard of. She led the Big East in rebounds, and the Big East is not a basketball conference to scoff at. I know it just means more around here, but the Big East is really solid in college basketball, both in men's and women's basketball. She led the Big East in rebounds, was number 2 in scoring. She was averaging 26 points a game, over 12 rebounds a game, and just shy of 3 steals a game. I mean, this girl's something special. Kim Mulkey is building a super team. Kim Mulkey is collecting some of the top talent in the country, not just through who she's been recruiting, because LSU is one of the top recruiting classes in the country, not just with the players that she collected via the transfer portal when she came to LSU, a la Angel Reese, but she just continues to put the work in, and she continues to put everyone in this sport on notice. And look, this team's going to be the villains of college basketball, if they are not already. If the ring incident in the national championship didn't make LSU women's basketball already a villain, we'll double down on some of the biggest personalities in the sport, I'll add. Collecting some of the best talent in the sport. That already make you put the target on your back. You add the personality of the head coach. You add the personality of Angel Reese, of Flage, of Haley Van Lith, of Anissa Morrow. That just grows the target that's on your back. But you know what? I love it. I love it. Because you know when you can talk the talk, when you walk the walk. This team this past season has walked the walk. And with this talent, this team that's being built, I have no reason to believe that this team won't walk the walk at the highest standard for the second year in a row. And oh yeah, by the way, if it's not obvious, LSU has the number 1 transfer portal class in the country, which is probably to be assumed when you have the number 1 and number 2 ranked transfer portal player in the country, and the way too early top 25 for women's college basketball. LSU also holds that top spot. What Kim Mulkey is building is something special. If you're not put on notice yet, take a look, because it's really, really fun to follow. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. Every dayers, over, under, win totals. What does Vegas think about LSU? We'll get into that on tomorrow's episode of Locked On LSU.